It was in the dusty outskirts of Abilene, where the wind howled like a caged beast and the sun beat down with the weight of 100 merciless summers, that Clara Johnson's life took a turn she could never have foreseen. Though her world had already been torn apart years earlier, she had once been the fastest rider in 3 counties, a girl with fire in her eyes and dreams big enough to outpace any train. But when a runaway stagecoach had rolled over her legs during a flash flood on the Chisholm Trail, leaving her broken and forever bound to a wheelchair, her father, a man hardened by whiskey and losses of his own making, had looked at her with a coldness that could freeze the very marrow and told her, "You're useless without legs," words that didn't just break her heart, they shattered her very sense of being. And from that day on she was no longer the proud daughter of Thomas Johnson the cattleman, but rather the burden he made no effort to hide from the world. Years rolled by and Clara learned to keep her head down, to work the sewing needle with a speed that belied her stillness, to keep the ranch ledger balanced when her father couldn't count past a bottle, and to swallow the ache every time she heard her siblings laugh in the yard while she sat by the window feeling like a ghost in her own home. Yet life in the Wild West has a way of throwing the unexpected at you, sometimes wrapped in dust and silence, sometimes in the shape of a man who doesn't speak much but whose presence changes the air itself. And that man came into her life on a day the wind was hot as a blacksmith's forge, riding a chestnut gelding with a gait as smooth as honey and a gaze that seemed to see right past the ranch's peeling paint and into the shadows where Clara sat. His name was Eli Carter, a quiet ranch hand looking for work, a man whose reputation was stitched together from half-whispered tales of gunfights avoided rather than won, of nights spent under the stars when he could have taken shelter, of a loyalty so rare folks thought it near foolish. And though her father eyed him like another mouth to feed and offered him the bunkhouse without ceremony, Eli's attention was not on Thomas Johnson but on the young woman by the ledger desk, the one whose hands moved like lightning over the accounts and whose eyes held the storms she'd never let loose. For weeks, Eli worked the ranch without complaint, mending fences, breaking the ornery bay colt no one else dared touch, bringing in the herd at dusk. Yet every evening he'd stop by Clara's window and ask if she wanted fresh wildflowers for her desk or maybe a story from town, and though she tried to keep her answers short, the sound of his voice became the highlight of her day, for there was no pity in it, only a kind of steady respect that made her feel human again. It was in those stolen moments, while her father barked orders at the hands and the dust swirled in golden shafts, that she began to remember she was more than what she'd lost. But trouble, as it does in the West, came riding fast and ugly one August morning when a neighboring rancher named Luke Harrow rode in with 3 of his men with the kind of eyes that measured land and people as though they could be bought or taken with equal ease, and Luke, with a grin that made Clara's stomach twist, made an offer for the Johnson ranch, calling her father, "old man," and suggesting he sell before the bank forced him to. But when Thomas refused, Luke's gaze slid toward Clara like a rattler sizing prey, and he said in a voice loud enough for every hand to hear, "Then maybe I'll take her instead, see if she's worth keeping, even without legs." A cruelty so sharp Clara felt the air leave her lungs. Her father laughed nervously, perhaps thinking it was a joke, but Eli stepped forward then, slow and deliberate, placing himself between Clara and the men, his voice low but carrying like a rifle crack. "She's my wife, not for sale," and the yard fell silent as if the earth itself had stopped to listen, for though it wasn't true yet, the way Eli said it made it a fact no one dared challenge in that moment, and Luke, finding no fight he could win without blood, spat in the dirt and rode off with his men, but not before promising he'd be back. In the days that followed, Eli and Clara spoke more than ever, her asking why he'd said what he had, him simply replying that some things don't need reasons when they're right, and it was then she learned of the family he'd lost in a fire, of the years he'd wandered with no one to call his own, and she began to see the truth. Eli didn't see her as broken, he saw her as whole in ways no one else had bothered to notice. When Luke Harrow returned under the cover of night with torches in hand, ready to burn the Johnson ranch to ash, it was Eli who met them at the gate, a rifle steady in his hands, warning them once to leave before the ground got thirsty for blood, and when they ignored him, shots rang out, sending the outlaws scattering into the dark, their pride wounded more than their hides. Afterward, Clara found herself wheeling out into the yard, the scent of gunpowder in the air, looking up at the man who'd risked everything for someone the world said was worth nothing, and without thinking, she said, "If you still mean what you said, about me being your wife, I'd say yes," to which Eli, for the first time since she'd met him, let a slow, honest smile spread across his face and replied, "I meant every word," and the wedding that followed was small but fierce with joy. The town's gossips silenced by the sight of the quiet rancher lifting his bride into the wagon with a care that made hardened men clear their throats, and from that day on, Clara was no longer the daughter dismissed as useless, but the woman who ran the Carter ranch alongside her husband, her sharp mind and unshakable will turning it into one of the most respected spreads in the territory. When folks came calling, they no longer looked at the wheelchair first. They looked at her eyes, the same eyes Eli had seen from the very beginning, the ones that burned with life and defiance, and in the years that followed, whenever trouble rode into town thinking it could measure her worth, it always found itself turned away at the gate by a man whose love had been the only measure that ever mattered. And friends, if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that worth is never measured by what's lost but by what's given and fought for, then I invite you to saddle up with us for more tales of grit, heart, and the kind of love the Wild West could barely contain. So hit that subscribe button, because the next ride's just around the bend.